Hi, you're listening to WHCR 90.3 FM.
I found out on my way to Harlem, Ellington, you don't live around here. He moved away one day, so they say, from Harlem. I can hear his echoes still. Now, you can't keep me away from where I was born. I was baptized by my daddy's horn. Now, you can't keep me away from where I was born. I was baptized by the jazz man's horn.
Good evening. Welcome to Community and Technology, where we connect the global community with news, information, and resources to hopefully improve your life. I'm Stuart Reid. I'm here with my co-host, Lena Marvin. Hey, Lena.
Hello, hello.
Good to have you here. We also have Dave Burstein here in the studio. Welcome, Dave.
Hi.
And we have a special guest. He has 30 years of experience in intellectual property, technology, and transactional law with a focus on internet law and policy. He's a graduate of Columbia Law School and a partner in the New York law firm Moses & Singer, and has recently been voted unanimously to be the president of the Internet Society of New York. I'm pleased to welcome Greg Shatan to our show. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you, Stu. It's good to be here.
Yeah. So I want to share with our audience a little bit about what is the Internet Society. All three of us, Greg is now the president, has been for about maybe 6 months or so. And Dave has been a member for quite a few years, and I'm a recent member as well, and board member. We're all our board members. But what is the Internet Society, Greg? Can you share that with us?
Certainly. The Internet Society really exists at two levels. There is a global Internet Society, which spans the world, which was founded about 25 years ago by some of the founders of the Internet. And then there are chapters of the Internet Society in various cities and countries all around the world. One of the oldest chapters is the New York chapter of the Internet Society, which I am proud and humbled to be the president of the board. Stu is now our secretary, and Dave is on the board, a longtime member. And what we try to do is both move forward the goals of the global Internet Society and local goals that are fitting for New York. I look at the Internet Society as being the conscience of the Internet, but it exists as a technical organization in many ways. It's not just a place for people to get together and chat. The Internet Society globally supports the IETF, which is the Internet Engineering Task Force that sets out a lot of the protocols and the ways that the pipes connect so that the Internet actually works. It's also supported by .org, which is ostensibly the home of non-commercial organizations on the Internet, or one of the homes. And there are basically several priorities that the Internet Society has, but the overarching priority or mission is a free and open Internet for all, and to try to connect everyone to the Internet.
Dave?
One question, Greg. How much are you paid as president of the board?
I am paid $0.
Which is important. The Internet Society here in New York is entirely volunteers. We need more of them. Please join us. We want to make that happen.
How do we do that, Greg?
Well,
how do our folks out there in the listening land?
It's really pretty easy. Hopefully you have an Internet connection, and you can go to internetsociety.org. You can join the Global Internet Society, and then you can elect which chapter or chapters you'd like to be part of. And you can elect, and you should elect, the New York chapter. We have over 3,000 members the last time I looked, all around the world. probably a hard core of 300 members or so who participate in some way or other. And of course, as you keep peeling the core down to the core, it's a smaller number still. So there's plenty of room for people who want to be active. So what we are after in New York, a couple of different things. And we just had a little board retreat to discuss some of our options for the coming year. Mm-hmm. But we definitely, support community connectivity, community networking. NYC Mesh is an organization that we kind of support and provide an umbrella for, and they are doing real live mesh networking in New York, mostly southern Manhattan and Brooklyn. So I don't know if there is any up in Harlem, but there should be. And, of course, there are other things going on here. Stu, I think you could talk about that.
Yeah. Well, we've talked about the stuff that our Streaming University project is doing here in Harlem and the South Bronx, providing streaming technology to community organizations, and there's also often companion Wi-Fi service as well. And we're hoping to connect more broadly with the Internet Society as well, and to have them come up and experience some of the stuff out here in the community, a lot of stuff in the public and affordable housing in particular. And we think that would be a good connection to bridge at least the conceptual divide between the folks downtown, the folks uptown, and a lot of the conceptual stuff that the Internet Society talks about with feet on the ground up here in Harlem.
And I think that's what local chapters should be doing is bridging those gaps and bringing people together. We don't have an army of paid employees. We don't even have an army necessarily of volunteers. But what we can do is use the kind of the goals of the Internet Society and the support that we do get in order to bring groups together, to partner with different groups and try to amplify our message. And the message that the global Internet Society has as priorities are a lot of relating to security of the Internet, security of Internet of Things.
Mm-hmm. We're going to shut down the U.S. surveillance of the whole world? That's what people think of when you say security. They remember Snowden.
I don't think so.
You don't?
Well, I think what the Internet Society isn't going to shut down. I would say the Internet Society is certainly for strong encryption and against surveillance.
But what do we do about it? We live in the most effective surveillance organization in the world is the United States government. It's almost unbelievable what they do. The Chinese and Russians would love to do the same. They don't have the $43 billion or whatever we spend every year. What can the Internet Society do to reduce that? And I say that because when I talked to a group of Africans in development, they said one of the biggest problems in getting people in the Internet Society is they're afraid of being watched. So a lot of people do care.
Absolutely. I think that what we can do is to provide a voice, to make sure that to provide support to those who are trying to protect against surveillance and protect encryption, try to help find that balance between privacy and security that so many find elusive. I think that there's an idea that you have to give up on privacy in order to be protected. And on the other hand, there's this idea that privacy should be an absolute. Privacy has to be proportionate, but on the other hand, we live in a society with far too much surveillance and far too much, government control, it really goes back, and this is why I think of the Internet of the Internet Society as the conscience of the Internet, if it can be. The Internet was set up by people just doing their own thing without government support, there was the ARPANET and DARPANET.
DARPA funded the bloody
Well, there
thing.
was that part, but it was at least it was intended to be. It started out with just two computers being hooked up together. So there's the idea, though, that it should be. There is the kind of the more grassroots ethos part of the Internet. There are lots of different strands to what makes the Internet today, and people have to recognize that the Internet physically is a voluntary network of networks that almost could walk away from each other at any point if they ceased to agree.
Did you see the news from Russia?
No, I did not.
Oh, they're moving ahead to set up an alternative route in case the United States and ICANN decides to cut them off, which almost definitely won't happen. But given that we have an active sanctions in the Soviet Union, it's not crazy for them to say we need a system that's going to work if the U.S. government gets mad at us again.
Well, we do need a system that's above and beyond the control of any government, and that's what is we aim for. With the Internet Society is a private organization, does not have strong government ties. I don't think it does. Dave, you seem to disagree.
I've been involved in we disagree on a lot of this.
Well, that's what
because
makes this interesting.
we both happen to care about bringing a better internet to everybody, and we disagree about how active we should be and what actions we should take. But I've been involved in the international policy. I've gone to big ITU meetings and know most of the people there. Most of the people there think that the positions the Internet Society has taken in ITU and other international issues correspond to those of the United States, because the people running the Internet Society happen to believe in the same things as the U.S. government. Can you think of any major issue in international internet where the Internet Society took a strong position that differed from the United States government?
I'd have to take a few hours to do research because I can't think of offhand whether they are.
How many countries are members or involved in the Internet Society internationally?
I think there are upwards of 90.
Mm-hmm.
Outside of the United States, most countries have one chapter that covers the country, but that's not always the case.
How many chapters are there in the U.S.?
In the U.S., I think about 20.
No, it's like six or seven.
Really?
No, it's more than that. But anyway, it's somewhere between 6 and 20.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are
some of those aren't doing anything. Like
yes, well,
Philadelphia.
there are some that are dormant.
But now, to Dave's point, is it so that the U.S. faction or U.S. chapters dominate the governance of the Internet Society?
Well, I didn't say that.
The chapters don't dominate the governance at all.
The chapters have very little authority and make very few decisions.
How is the Internet Society governed?
It's a bottom-up organization that's governed in a top-down fashion.
Okay.
Basically, well, I should say that the new CEO of the Internet Society is somebody I think will quietly shake things up a bit, Andrew Sullivan. And he comes out of, a hard engineering background, but with a philosophy major in college. And I think, he will be subtly pushing the Internet Society.
And he's U.S. based.
He is U.S. based, but Canadian born.
Okay.
Which, there are a lot of Canadians hanging around, someone you don't even know, in the Internet area. But in any case, the Internet Society is headquartered outside of D.C., and there is a tendency for there to be a fair amount of U.S. influence, but they have offices in Belgium and they have folks scattered around the world. So it really is a pretty international organization.
Except in making decisions on international policy, I actually can give you the answer to my question.
Oh, you can?
Yeah. Well, you're a lawyer. You shouldn't ask questions you don't know the answer to. I've asked the former head of the Internet Society, Kathy Brown, and the chief policy person, what's her name? She's out of the State Department. She hasn't been around since you got involved because she just had a baby. She's the vice president of policy and in charge. Same question.
What's the question?
How many major decisions has the Internet Society disagreed with the United States in international stuff since 2011, which is when I know the data? And they couldn't come up with one. I also asked Larry Strickland the same question.
Encryption-related issues.
The Obama administration was unclear on that and deliberately did not impose encryption. And I haven't seen the Trump actually doing more. So that was safe ground, and they had to do it. The Internet Society didn't want to do that. I came from the IETF. We couldn't resist. But it really – now, that doesn't mean that Kathy Brown took orders from her former employer. She was a Verizon lobbyist, and a very good one, and a very generous one, or the United States government. I've learned looking at Washington, and Stu, we've talked about this.
Mm-hmm.
The people who are making decisions that we disapprove of and think are ridiculous, like the FCC on net neutrality, are not people who do it for money. You could walk, as we said on the show before, you could walk into Mike Powell's office. I realized this was amazing.
Former FCC Commissioner Michael Powell.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And he did not make a decision in 4 years that was not okay with the bells and the big phone companies.
Mm-hmm.
But if you walked into his office with $1 million in a suitcase, you'd probably have been arrested, and you certainly would have been thrown out. So when I came to look at Washington, it's now 20 years I've been following it, I realized that the key thing in the influence is not paying off people, at least around the FCC. Congress, we have the best Congress money can buy, and I can give examples there. But the FCC and so on don't take money. So how do you influence an honest man? And the easiest way to do that is to make sure the people in charge are people who happen to agree with you.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And surround them by other people who you do pay a great deal, who happen to agree with you, and dominate the conversation and define the issues. And that's how the phone companies almost always get their way at the FCC.
Hang on one second, Dave.
WHCR 90.3 FM, New York.
And that's why it's very important that these organizations that should be international should reflect all the different views that are going to make the Internet whole and survive and last when we no longer have Insurf and we no longer have most of the Internet members, most of the people on the Internet in the United States and Western Europe.
Mm-hmm. I agree that Internet governance in a large sense tends to be dominated, especially in the ICANN space, by North America, Western Europe. But there are definitely strong voices from South America, Australia, New Zealand, India, and others. So we see shifts in those over
What is
time.
ICANN, Dave? Can you share that with, Greg?
The ICANN stands for the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers.
And what do they do?
What they do, the boring way to describe it is that they are in charge of the domain name policy, both the top-level domain to the right of the dot and policies about the second-level domains to the left of the dot,
mm-hmm.
and also coordinate the address numbers, the IP addresses as well. The less boring way to look at it, still probably fairly boring, is that a lot of different kinds of Internet policies are set there, all really relating to the domain name system, not really to content and not really to services.
Mm-hmm.
Those are done elsewhere, but a lot of them still can influence content issues relating to protecting IP rights in the Internet, for protecting privacy rights, protecting the rights of different populations to try to get to the domain name system. ICANN meets about 3 times a year and live, and then all year there is policy work going on where groups of stakeholders from all around the world, but not distributed according to the global population, get together and argue about policy until somehow a consensus is formed, or it's not.
Mm-hmm. Dave, you have a comment on that?
Yeah. ICANN, to my surprise, is probably the most open organization I've seen in international policy of any.
Mm-hmm.
That, in fact, I could go to the meeting and have a very strong say if I had something to say and knew how to play the games. They do things like put their budget out for comment by everybody a month or so before the board gets to choose it. So it's a good example of an organization that tries to involve all its members and all the people who are interested enough to show up.
Mm-hmm.
The decisions come to a board, but the more important thing about ICANN is that people think it runs the Internet, and it doesn't.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely does not.
Mm-hmm.
Let me quote Steve Crocker, who was the last board chair there. He said, "What we do is really important, but it doesn't change most people's experience of the Internet, which is why I'd like to change the subject to things that would change people's experience of the Internet, starting with here in New York.
Okay, I thought you said Stu was in charge. But
Yeah, well, before we do that, I would just want to bring Lena into the conversation.
Lena, I apologize.
Yes. Hi, Lena. Lena's been, she's a bit younger than us, if I can say that, Lena, about you.
True.
She's a millennial, but she's been involved in the Internet for decades, despite her young age. And I'm wondering, Lena, do you have any experience with the Internet Society? Does that resonate with you at all?
Yes, we've interviewed them before.
Okay.
And the Internet Society should be crucial in this. It has $30 million a year that comes from those .org. That's more resource, and it calls itself an advocacy group now, at least one of their vice presidents does.
So I no longer live in New York, but when I did, I actually got to attend a couple of talks at the Internet Society, and one of them presented an idea on privacy that kind of blew my mind, and I really enjoyed the deep thought and the communication and the resources that are provided. So it's a very cool organization with neat stuff going on.
Well, that's what I hope that we can continue to do. And
Or again do.
Well, we had some pretty good programs in the last year, I thought, and as well as a couple of nice cocktail parties. But I think what's important is to try to provide that platform to bring disparate people together and bring ideas out that might blow people's minds. And so, I've actually only been the president for 4 months.
Oh, okay.
Time flies when you're having fun. So I've got one more year at least to do it. So I think we really want to try to make the Internet Society New York chapter more relevant in New York, whether it's to provide the glue between different organizations or different schools of thought to help sponsor, co-sponsor events to try to push, again, our conscience in the way, whether it's with the big internet giants who are now coming to New York in even greater numbers.
How about the Amazon and Google just had big announcements about headquartering operations here?
Yes, which I think changes it makes our job more important to provide a counterweight to kind of the voice of big internet and the walled gardens, and that's where I think we can take advantage of the changes here to try to bring more people together and to try to raise the profile of the Internet Society, which ultimately will hopefully bring us more live active volunteers. So again, if you want to join internetsociety.org, join the organization. It's free. And you can then join the New York chapter. It's also free. You'll get on our mailing list. You'll see all kinds of interesting stuff. Hopefully you'll have some good programs that you'll be interested in. Maybe you can volunteer. Maybe one day you'll be sitting at this microphone as the president of the New York chapter. It could happen to you.
And that would be great because we really need the fresh blood. But
you make us sound like vampires.
Old vampires.
Those are in Washington. We don't have any of those in the people we know in New York. But Greg, I support Greg in all the things he's talking about. I'm all in favor of great programs and think people, and since the Internet Society has a reputation, whether or not we live up to it, we can get almost anybody to speak. Vin Cerf, who's one of the people who started it, was at a recent meeting. I could call Tim Wu, who come up with the idea of net neutrality. And I've been suggesting...
Or at least the name.
The name, yes. I was actually fighting for it 5 years before and dealt with it on cable. But we have that kind of access. But when I'm in it because I want to get something done. I want to get more of the poor people in New York connected to the Internet by making it free or cheap. Stu, is that a good goal?
That's a great goal. I think that's important. I think a great corollary goal, which is something that the Streaming University project is very much involved in, is helping folks have the tools and applications to, okay, we got the Internet, what do we do with it? How do we use it to improve our lives? I think that's a really critical piece. A lot of folks that don't have internet that we work with, the first question is, why do I need it? What do I use it for? And until you show them applications and services and how they could use it to improve their life, they may not even seek it out. That's one of the hurdles, and I think a big one.
I think that really points out why the term digital divide is so relevant and meaningful. When you're on the other side of the divide, you don't even know what's going on. You don't know what you're missing, for better or for worse. You don't have the problem of internet addiction or having your information stolen on the internet, but you also are missing out on being part of the fabric of life that has now become, almost inextricably intertwined with internet access. And so crossing the digital divide is a huge educational step. And the fact of the matter is that the digital divide isn't just in the global south or in developing countries. It's all over New York City.
Right here in New York City. Yeah, roughly half of folks that live in public housing, of which there are almost 500,000 folks, roughly half of them have no internet at home.
And if you just look at the effect of that on school kids being able to do their work, do their research, I mean, yes, you should get to real books, but, we can all attest to the fact that we look at a lot fewer real books than we used to, because the internet is there with, huge amounts of information. And
as a professional librarian, I am also wanting to point out there are ebooks that are available, and getting to research what you need computers. Libraries know that. That's why there's computers there. But if you have them at home, your homework becomes easier. You're not on a deadline of getting it done before the place closes.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that's an important point, Lena, particularly for a lot of the market that where I work and my partner Doug Frazier works. There's a huge use of smartphones, which is great. We find that folks of color, Black and Latinos, adopt the smartphone technology in greater proportion than the rest of the population, which is good because the smartphone gives you access to so much stuff, but you can't do your term paper. You can't do the really in-depth research that you're talking about, Lena, without having a more sophisticated device, i.e. a computer, and internet at home, not just while you're out in the street walking around with your smartphone.
So part of what we need to do is keep people honest, including speaking truth to power, to get the internet out across the digital divide, because that divide is not just unique to the internet. It involves a lot of other
there's an economic divide that is, I think, probably under the underpinning of all that we're talking about.
Right.
Yeah.
And we could veer off into economics and sociology and politics here. But let's.
Okay. We have the right to go wherever we want to, but let's stick close to technology. And let's stick on to what are the particular things the Internet Society in New York could do to bring access to more people. And from our meeting I had suggestions.
Hold that thought, Greg. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to be right back and Greg's going to tell us about that. So hang. But we're back, community and technology, with special guest Greg Shatan and our co-hosts, Dave Burstein, Lena Marvin. I'm Stuart Reid. And Dave, you were just asking Greg to talk about some of the things that the Internet Society can do here in New York City.
And Greg is doing good work in education. Events that have really solid content are good. Great. But I think that the Internet Society has the reputation and the credibility and the knowledge to get in the middle of some of the big issues where we have consensus on the Internet Society in the first place. And let me suggest one. Honest advertising, and that you get what you pay for. Mm-hmm. It turns out that most of the issues around net neutrality is they don't actually connect you to the Internet at the 50 megabits, they say. They block some of the places you'd want to go, or stifle them, or throttle them, whatever. Kevin Martin, a conservative Republican, said publicly, when I asked him the right question, that if they advertise 3 megabits of Internet, you should be able to connect to the Internet at 3 megabits. And it turns out if you connected at 50 megabits, almost all the net neutrality issues go away that are current and are involved today. Now, how do you make that happen? Well, I've been arguing that that the carrier should be held to delivering what they advertise. In my case, for the freedom of speech issues and things like that, but also in basic consumer stuff. Greg, did you see the charter settlement?
I've seen some things about it. I haven't read the settlement itself yet.
It's an absolutely unprecedented $174 million agreement from Charter. $60 million is going to go in refunds to customers.
This was on a Time Warner's watch that the ripoff happened, correct, Dave?
Well, there's also, and this is where Greg and a lawyer can come into it, there was absolutely no doubt on the fraud. I read the original papers. A friend of mine was part of the team that put them together.
Mm-hmm.
They were doing things like saying you have a 200 megabit internet and giving you a modem that couldn't go faster than 50 megabits.
Right.
And when you complain, they say, oh, you just don't understand,
Mm-hmm.
and so on. Absolute clear case of fraud. In England, you now can't advertise internet speed unless you get it to at least half of your members.
Mm-hmm.
Germany is coming up. I think in Germany you have to give the average speed as well as the total speed.
Is there any such regulation here in the U.S., either federally or locally, or state?
Yeah. Oh, Greg can tell you all the limits of
Right.
it.
There are whole layers of regulation, both the city, state, and federal level. But, of course, the issue is how do you hold companies' feet to the fire?
Mm-hmm.
And, consider the fact that while we're here talking about megabits, there are parts of the world that we New Yorkers think are less sophisticated and advanced than us that are putting in place gigabit internet. So we have a bigger issue as well, which is how do we keep up?
Every home in New York should have the option of gigabit internet since 2014. An agreement made by Verizon that they would offer their fiber, which now is a gigabit, to every home in New York. They made that deal because New York City said you can't get a TV franchise without going along. The politicians did the right thing here. And then a few years later, Verizon said, forget about it, sue us. And they've been tying it up for 4 years.
Yeah, how do you hold a $200 billion corporation's feet to the fire? I think
Well,
that's
one of the
the real
things
question.
we can do as a grassroots organization, which is essentially what we are, is to find and partner with other organizations that are already trying to deal with this issue, find our local politicians and community activists who are working on this, try to bring people together, probably try to have an event where we bring together folks, and we can have both elected officials there, and we can have people who are fighting the good fight on this come together. We can try to put some sunlight on this. I think that we can use what the Internet Society has, which is a reputation, and it is access to people and places and some money when we need to make something happen, and ultimately try to put a voice forward and challenge the kind of the big the corporations. Even if we are a small organization can make a big noise, and more importantly, it can orchestrate a lot of other individual noisemakers into an orchestra of noise, which can't be missed. And you look for the right public official who is excited about this. Everyone likes to have a good thing to sink their teeth into. So whether it's the city controller or the public advocate or one of the local assemblymen, state senators, whoever it might be, borough presidents, you just got to find out who is excited about this. Give them support, and put them in touch with both the people and with the big bad wolves that are on the other side of this issue.
Dave?
I actually had this conversation with the new congressman from Harlem, who said...
SPI?
What?
SPI,
yeah. Who said, we have a fiber desert in Washington Heights. And when I wrote that up, I changed it to Upper Manhattan so that people didn't think it was a racial issue. And he cares about the people who aren't Dominicans in his district, too. He cares. Doesn't mean he gets everything right, but he cares. we could go to people like that, and what I would want to do is mostly educate them. That Verizon has 3 lobbyists who call on every congressman and their staffers on a regular basis. They have slews of academics and think tanks who are writing and talking about all these things. They have hundreds of people writing submissions to the FCC and in the law. They dominate the discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And something that I think is natural for the Internet Society to do is simply educate the people on the facts in as accurate a way as we could. Another example on that, which we don't have to go into, is what's happening on the Sprint T-Mobile deal. Most of the people in Washington making that decision don't understand that what they were putting out as the technology and the rationale doesn't hold up technically. And
this is a 5G 3-cart molly that you've been talking about in recent weeks, Dave.
And it turns out that the recently upgraded 4G does almost everything they said the 5G will do.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't have to allow benefit. And there's good academic data that it would cost probably $10 to $20 billion a year.
David, T-Mobile is a foreign corporation, is it not?
T-Mobile is controlled by Deutsche Telekom.
Mm-hmm.
Sprint is controlled by SoftBank in Japan.
Also, they're both foreign corporations.
Yeah, and we can get into that, but I want to take advantage of Greg here talking about the things where Greg
Take advantage of me in what sense?
That you can tell us some things because you know a lot of these things, some of which I don't know. So I can tell you the T-Mobile technology straight from their number 2 technical person, but Greg knows some of the issues that I don't.
This is true. Although, let me shift the focus just a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Because in talking to the average person, for those who are on the side of the digital divide that has access, they view the internet as an appliance in a lot of ways. It's something that it should work like a refrigerator. It keeps things cold. It opens, it has a light, and after that, it's a complete mystery. So we're talking about 4G versus 5G and fiber and all these things.
Let's do that another week. We have break here this week.
That is to some people that's kind of my eyes glaze over territory. Mm-hmm. So it's important to recognize these are not 2 separate issues though. You have to bridge a gap, which is you have to educate people who want that appliance to work about what's really going on, some of which can be rather ugly politics or ugly technology or technology hanging on, or on the other hand, really beautiful technology that's available and maybe isn't getting to market or isn't getting into this market. So you have to understand that there's not 2 separate camps. The I want the internet to work camp and the I'm going to worry about, the differences between optimized 4G and first gen 5G. They need to talk to each other, and you need to take enough of the understanding of the secret sauce of the technology and get the people who are just want the internet to work excited and to understand one of the reasons the internet isn't working for them as well as it could isn't because the internet doesn't work as well as it could. It's because stuff is not getting out there that should be getting out there.
Mm-hmm.
And that there are a lot of things that people need to know about, what's happening due to politics and due to, various corporate action, inaction, and the like, that is keeping the internet from, moving, to where it should be for everybody at speeds at which everybody can enjoy, access, on an unthrottled, untrammeled way.
Mm-hmm.
Let me bring in Lena, because I don't know her opinion on this.
Sure.
Whole lot of people will say, oh, you could talk to the congressman. Nobody's going to listen. You can educate people with a lot of facts that are really important. It's not going to make a difference in the power. You've been and done a lot of things in your life. Are there a reasonable percentage of the politicians who will try to do the right thing if you can explain it to them and it's clear?
Sure,
I don't know what
they're not being bribed too much and they're not holding biases against the people they're representing. I mean, yeah, I have a master's in history, so I get these are very hard questions if your scope is too big. Sure. I'll go with sure. I mean, I hope so.
I'm sure there's some. We can argue about whether it's 15% or 65%.
I'm reasonably optimistic at this point with some of the changes. I think there's a new set of fresher blood in New York City and state politics. Not to get into New York State politics per se, but the dismantling of the IDC and the bringing in of fresh faces. You can name them. There's no need to name them. But the fact is that the order is being shaken up to a good extent. And if you can catch those folks before they get eaten by the permanent system.
That's interesting because I didn't know what's going on in New York and didn't see it. But Stu and I have the relevant knowledge on that because we both took contemporary civilization at the same university. You went to law school there. In contemporary civilization at the university, one of the readings was from Barrington Moore, who looked at when does change happen. Now, he was looking at pretty extreme change. He was really asking, when does something like the Russian or the French Revolution happen? And he looked at the history, and one of the things he said is usually it happens when there is a split in the ruling class. That you're able to persuade a significant part. In the Russian case, you had a whole lot of people who wanted to have some kind of liberal democracy instead of the Tsar. During the Vietnam War, we had some of the most distinguished people in the United States literally out on the streets marching. We don't have that in the Iraq War. And that when there is a disagreement among the people who have that power, you have way more opportunity. Do you remember that one?
I don't remember that one, but what I would say, my comment on that would be that, I think it's a consciousness evolution and shift that needs to happen. I think that, we're seeing that right now today as we have entered the 21st century and as we have entered the new millennium. I think there is a consciousness shift. Sometimes it's hard to see. But with the current administration in the White House, I think it's exacerbating the contrast and making the picture so much more clear for so many folks across the globe. I think that is pushing the consciousness evolution. And I think as that happens, we're going to see some change. Because I don't believe that there's going to be just one incident or one person or one thing that's going to change things. I think it's an evolutionary process, but I think we are in a major shift right through here. And I hope I'm optimistic with Greg on that.
And I have some experience, not on the big issues. I couldn't affect Washington's opinion on the war of Iraq, but on things like what are the terms of a merger or a settlement that could help poor people or get more broadband to more places. The charter thing, incidentally, included the requirement they reach 147,000 people they don't reach yet.
That's in rural New York?
It wasn't specified.
Okay.
So it could be Brooklyn and Queens, but they mostly cover
But it's available in Brooklyn and Queens. The problem is that, folks can't afford it, and they don't know why they should even be trying to afford it. I mean, it's a shell game, if you ask me, the way they talk about, well, it's here. What do you want? It's available. Folks don't take advantage of it. That's not my problem. This is what the operators are saying. And, my pushback is it needs to be affordable. And I know, Dave, you and I have had this conversation about what is affordable. In my mind, there's got to be some free access. Affordable is free. It's very difficult to tell people that, hey, you can afford $10 a month when you are scrambling to pay your kids' tuition, to put food on the table, to buy your medicine, to pay your rent, and all the other things that so many, half the people in public housing are living below the poverty level, below $24,000. Half of the 500,000 people in public housing. Half of the people in public housing are unemployed. So, to me, it's a spacious argument to say, oh, $10 internet, they can afford that, and that solves the problem. I don't think it does.
And I'm thinking of one of my colleagues that I met through ICANN, but who was off doing different things now.
Mm-hmm.
A guy named Evan Leibovich.
Yeah.
He's bringing internet connectivity to refugee camps in the Middle East and North Africa because he realized, first off, big refugee camps that are quasi-permanent have local economies within them.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have internet access, you can actually access the global economy.
Mm-hmm.
And you can actually ship, make and ship things out of or provide services from even a refugee camp if you have internet access.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're talking about, public housing, I'm not going to compare it to a refugee camp. What I'm saying is if you can bring people out of a cycle that has put them into that refugee camp through internet access, you can do the same thing with getting people out of cycles.
Yeah.
My wife works in a neighborhood in the Bronx where only 15% of the people have a high school education.
Mm-hmm.
That is not a good cycle for the next generation. So you want to try to break all of these cycles. And the power of the internet, when it does come to you, is immense. Of course, it's the right internet. It can't just be for looking at pictures of cats or porn, or playing stupid games or having your data stolen.
And that's back to my whole discussion about the Streaming University project and putting the tools in folks' hands. So often, what I see in our communities is that folks are huge consumers via their smartphones of services on the internet, but they're not producing. They haven't taken control of the internet, as in the situation you just described, Greg, where folks in the refugee camp are actually engaging in commerce and creating and buying and selling, mostly in particular selling on the internet. Those are the skills, those are the tools that I see is the mission of the Streaming University project and other like-minded folks to help put those tools and that training in the hands of folks right here on the ground so the internet becomes a tool for their empowerment.
And this is a great dream, and sometimes it comes true. Unfortunately, many people, especially the corporations in Washington and around the world, take it and say, because it will be so wonderful to have the internet, you have to give us a $4 billion subsidy to get it to people.
Mm-hmm.
And that turns out to be typical in the United States Universal Service and common in many other parts of the world. And the other thing is, I've seen the kid coming from the projects in Long Island City, working with the community network I was volunteering for. It was the old Dorsey Embassy. And they did some training, and they connected people to the internet for free. Just had to buy a modem. And about 6 years later, I bumped into the guy. He had a good computer job at Merrill Lynch. So it definitely can help some people. But the folks who think that it is the major lever that's going to alleviate poverty haven't looked at the data. I've looked at the international data on it, and it's a factor, but it's a small factor, and there are a lot of things.
Yeah. At the end of the day, the internet is just a tool. It's not going to change the economic inequality until we teach folks how to use that tool to help change that inequality. I think that's the fundamental problem.
Yes, but on the other hand, keeping people away from the internet is a way of keeping people down.
Yeah, without a doubt.
And the internet is one piece of a big rope ladder that can be used to climb out. And yes, it's definitely not a big factor, but not having access to the internet, in a sense, is a big factor. And so what I'd say is it's necessary but not sufficient to get people onto the internet and into the 21st century, because getting that job at Merrill Lynch, without access to the internet would have been impossible. And when it's funny you mentioned Long Island City, since that is where Amazon is putting 25,000 jobs and promising to bring some largesse to the Queensbridge houses, the biggest project in the city and maybe even the country. That's right off their doorstep.
It is the biggest in the country.
And so that's an example. So maybe a lot more kids from Long Island City can break out.
But even that 25,000 is a drop in the bucket when you look at the population here in New York City that is underemployed, unemployed, very low income.
And those 25,000 jobs, some of them may be entry-level, trainable jobs, but a lot of them are not going to be. Right. So they're not going to benefit,
the guys on the street.
The guys on the street, the guys, getting out of high school and or maybe some college.
We got about a minute left, guys.
Well,
Dave,
let me
you have
take
some
the
parting
minute for
thoughts?
something that I should be saying, the pie stuff. We've criticized the FCC on a whole lot of things. We haven't called them corrupt. We've just called them wrong. They did something very right this week. Under the leadership of the chairman, they put out an NPRN in order to free up. They went for the process.
Notice of proposed rulemaking.
They started the process to free up 800 megahertz of spectrum, around 6 gigahertz. That would double what's unlicensed and potentially available for Wi-Fi. It will probably go through. The equipment is just becoming possible. It will be a few years before it's cheap enough for most people to use. But it is absolutely the right thing to bring in this spectrum, and there were a lot of political issues there, and make it available to everybody. And I wrote this as Bravo, Chairman Pai.
Okay. Greg, any parting thoughts before we sign off here?
Well, Stu, thank you, and thank you, Dave, for being part of this conversation, and thank you, Lena. Just one parting word is to join the Internet Society, internetsociety.org, and join the New York chapter of the Internet Society, and come help us do all the things we've been talking about for the last hour.
Okay.
Thanks.
Well, thank you, Greg. Thanks for coming. I look forward to you and your colleagues coming up to Harlem. We've got a big launch coming up at Grand Houses, our Grand Houses community radio station, sometime in the next couple of months. And we'd like the Internet Society to be a big part of that.
I'd love to come back. I grew up about 30 blocks from here.
Okay.
So.
And I grew right by Grand Houses and used to go play basketball there all the time.
There you go.
And I'd be the only white guy in the gym, but I wanted to play, and it was the nearest hoop.
Okay. Well, thank you all. Thank you, Lena. And,
have a great one.
Okay. Happy holidays to everyone. Have a great holiday. And we will be back next week. We're going to have Shuli Halleck on, former director of the New York City, of the New York chapter of the Internet Society, and an activist in technology and the arts. So stay tuned for news at the top of the hour with Brother Bill, followed by Harlem Jazz with Tammy. You're listening to WHCR FM 90.3.